Today's podcast is to review the entirety of Warbreaker by Mr. Brandon Sanderson himself. And so, like always, Plot Goblins, we are going to talk about what we liked. We're going to talk about what we didn't like. We're going to talk about characters. And more importantly, we're talking plot.
Yes, baby. Stirring up the plot cauldron.
And I think we're in for a good episode because I think... So what Wes and I took away from some of the previous podcasts that we've done is that we don't want to talk too much about it off screen because we kind of influence each other a little bit, and then plus we're basically retelling what we've already told each other on the podcast, and it feels like you're not as included.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
So we haven't said much of anything. I know the shape of your impression, and I know the general, dare I say, color of your impression.
Wow, see what you did there. I see what you did there.
But I think we dive right in, and maybe a good place to start is just one thing that you liked and maybe something you didn't, and then we can just kind of see where that takes us.
Sure. I'll kick us off. One thing that I really liked was that this was so far removed from anything I've ever read, the magic system being tied to color and draining color and allowing that to fuel the awakening, to allow things to do things for you. I liked that. It was incredibly imaginative. I had no idea that that's what I was getting myself into. I also really liked that it was more of a political attempt than Sanderson typically does. And the third thing that I liked was that you viewed one pretty much singular scenario for the entire book from very different perspectives. And throughout the book, everybody kind of thought what was happening was not what was happening. So those were probably the three things that I liked. Now, the things that I didn't like are similar in that same vein. The points of view I thought were convoluted and they jumped around a lot. I like that Sanderson typically dedicates a chapter per point of view. Yeah. And in this one, he jumped around.
Especially towards the beginning.
Yes. And so that was challenging for me. And then the other piece, I thought the magic system was imaginative, but I just didn't like it. It's not that I didn't like the magic system. I had an incredibly hard time visualizing what was happening. And so for me, some of my best moments with Sanderson is when he's really able to allow me to visualize what's happening. And I didn't have that connection here. And so much of this book was the magic system. Yeah. And because I couldn't visualize it, I never felt connected to the book really from start to finish.
See, that really surprises me because as I was reading it, I thought you were going to love that because you are on record, really enjoying the visualization process of a magic system, and you're you're a really artistic guy. So I was kind of wondering what, because you have such a vivid imagination. I figured with the colors and the way that he described them that you were going to be, really have more of like a heightened experience. Yeah. But that wasn't the case, huh?
I believe a lot of the reviews that I read, people felt that connection, and maybe it was just when I was reading it, the way I was reading it, what I had going on in my life. Like I couldn't get that connection that I think other people did.
Yeah. So, I mean... Yeah, that makes sense. And we can get into like a more detailed review too, where you can kind of, if you want to explain some of the woes that you had with the book, you can have that opportunity. One thing, so on the contrary, I actually liked the magic system. I thought it was really unique. And frankly, I think it might even be one of the best standalones outside of Tress. I think Tress for me is still the best for whatever reason. Yeah. From start to finish, I really, really liked that book. Its prose, its system, really good. So I'm putting Tress on its own little standalone tier because he cracked that one out and just nailed it, in my opinion. Now, Warbreaker, I was just trying to look this up when it was written, it was written in 2009, it looks like, or it was published in 2009. So this is one of his earlier works. I think this is way better than Elantris.
Yeah, I've only read Tress, and this one is standalones. Yeah. Well, and I also read Mistborn 3.5, which was like 130 pages, so it's not even...
And that's more like lore, right? And
yeah, it's just about... Yeah, I don't want to get too deep.
But, so, anyways, I really did like the magic system. I thought that it was maybe one of his more unique ones. And frankly, I almost put it on par, and this is probably an unpopular opinion, by the way. I almost put it on par with Mistborn's magic system. That's how much, like, I just felt, in fact...
In uniqueness, or how much you enjoyed it?
How much I enjoyed it and uniqueness.
Sure,
now, I thought there are so many other elements of the Era 1 Mistborn that I liked more.
Sure.
You get a lot more character development. You get a lot more just stay power with what you're experiencing, because you know it's stacked up to be a trilogy, and, you know, the plot line gets to evolve in a way that's really tasty. With this book... It's all, you know, this was always meant to be a standalone, but yeah, for whatever reason, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I thought it was sick.
I felt bad that I wasn't enjoying it as much as you did. But...
And I don't know, I haven't read any of the reviews on Goodreads or anything, but yeah, in my opinion,
They're very high.
The best, like, outside of Tress, I think it's, and I've read Yumi and the Nightmare Painter as well. That was another standoff, and I read Elantris. So there's more that I could read to compare this to, but as of today, from what I've read, this is the best.
Yeah. Well, and Tress is kind of along the similar vein where it's the sea colors, but just the way that the spore colors, I should say. But anyhow.
Well, and the other thing that I really liked about this was I liked the twist in the middle where, you know, you didn't know anything about Vasher. And Vasher's character kind of is what kicks this book off with... Nightblood, the sword.
Nightblood.
And I love an animated object.
I liked Nightblood.
That's sick. In fact, dude, I was reading online, Sanderson might do a one-off of Nightblood.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Which would be interesting. I think I read something about that, like, you know, Nightblood may be like the main center of that book.
That'd be interesting.
Which would be very interesting. But I'm a big fan, I realized, of like, that's why I liked Undercrawler Carl. I liked having that animated cat in there. It just kind of makes it a little bit more, even more fantasy for me.
I love Donut.
So now, so now you have this animated sword, which he just wants to kill. I just really liked that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he was able to awaken steel, which is sick. You know, so he's able to go outside the confines of the traditional system as it was known to awaken steel, which nobody thought you could do. And it was kind of something he figured out himself. And all it knows is to destroy evil, but it doesn't understand the concept of evil.
Right.
So I liked that internal philosophical conundrum that this thing is in, where it's building a personality. Everything it knows is from Vasher and whoever experiences him. And he is able to decipher and determine some evil by, if you pick it up, you know, whether or not you try to use it to your advantage, or if you repel from it, you feel sick. But that otherwise he has no idea what's going on.
Yeah, it's kind of like AI. AI doesn't really know.
Yeah, it felt like
it just learns the patterns that you give it. And I will say, similar to Syl in Way of Kings, where she is sentient, but she's like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way, but I do. And it's not totally the same, but there are certainly some parallels there.
There's some parallels there. Well, there's a lot of parallels in his books. That's the other thing is, you know, it's almost like he's just continuing to write the same thing differently, hoping to get it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Like he has this master plan where he wants it to fit perfectly. It's almost like drawing the same picture over and over from a slightly different angle, hoping to get it right. That's what his books kind of feel like. And maybe that's why they feel so much like home.
Yeah.
Where it's like listening to a good song that you love, you know, where the artist just keeps getting it right for the most part. And they don't stray too far from that one song that's great. That's how I feel a little bit with Sanderson, because it had the same element of Christianity and politics, you know, and in this one, it reminded me a lot of, it reminded me a little bit of The Way of Kings, where at the Way of Kings, you know, you had this whole issue where Vorinism priesthood was corrupted and had tried to take over the hierarchy. And in this book, you kind of had a system where the court of gods are manipulating the gods. Like the priests there are manipulating the returned. And, you know, it turns out, though, that was like a sub-faction. You know, that it's sort of been ignored. that
Pon
was
Cal.
doing that.
The Pon Cal.
Yeah, they were the ones that were sort of, pulling the strings there corruption-wise, but still, in both cases you have priesthoods that are sort of weaponizing the religion to get political and military gain.
Mm-hmm.
So that is always something with Sanderson. And then, the politics and the religious stuff. But I did like that about Nightblood. And I liked that switch where you find out Denth is actually bad, and you find that the Vasher's actually good. I knew that there was going to be something there because Denth was just too overly accommodating, and Vivenna was too naive to pick it up. So it seemed like
it was too good to be true.
He was a con guy. Yeah, it just didn't feel right. Like in any good relationship, you're going to have stress. You're going to have strain. You're going to have more of what Vasher gave Vivenna, like a more authentic,
standoffish.
Yes, like he was himself.
Yes.
You have to be yourself. And Denth always kind of felt like that was a bit of a facade to me, like he was manipulating. But it still did surprise me.
Well, it's interesting though is that when you say it like that, Denth truly was being authentic. He is slimy, a master manipulator, and so it's just
Well, and he has good motive, I suppose. Like I think. Vasher killed his sister.
Yeah, Shashara, I think was her
Shashara,
name.
and I think Vasher was married to Shashara.
Or they had a
or
fling.
They had a thing. Yeah, so I mean, that's a complicated thing where I would love to know more about that. I'd love to know more about that, but that's a sidebar. So that's and then something I didn't like is I could not get invested into Vivenna's storyline. I just really struggled, and it stinks because for me, the book didn't really pick up until she basically found her, what was her partner, or that one guy's name that was her, she brought with him.
Oh, something with like a P or like, I don't know, Peter. Parlin. She had brought Parlin, and Parlin's just this sweet guy. Kind of reminds me of the blonde-haired dude on Frozen. Oh, kind of remind me of Spook.
Who's Spook?
Remember the Spook from Mistborn where he couldn't really talk?
Yeah, Lesteborn.
yeah.
Lesteborn.
Yeah, Lesteborn, yeah.
Spook. No, Spook was very accomplished.
Well, but he
was a little dummy at the beginning.
Just a goofy dude.
He couldn't talk.
He just showed up in they showed up in Hallandren, and he's like, "Oh, colors." He's just a guy that wears a Versace, just like gold shirt. He's like, "I'm fitting in."
You love a book when you want every character to have its own story arc and its own side series. And that is not necessary. And that is a little bit something that I want with this book. And that's how I know I kind of like it.
Yeah.
Is I would love to have more backstory on some of these characters. Not necessarily Parlin, but anyways,
I would like a side arc of Denth, and
Denth would be sick,
and whatever the other guy's name was.
Yeah, it was Denth, and it was a girl, Jules.
Oh no, Jules, and then the other guy, Tonk Fa. Denth, Tonk Fa, and Jules. That would be a fun little offshoot.
Honestly, if anything, his personality did remind me a little bit of the way Lesteborn talked.
Yeah.
Just kind of a hillbilly.
Just kind of dopey.
And he also just wants to kill.
Yeah, right. It's like Lenny and Carl. Denth and Tonk Fa are like Lenny and Carl.
Yeah. That's a good way to describe it. But, so I didn't really like her story arc until she found Parlin dead, escaped them, and ended up homeless. I actually liked that. And I want to give you an opportunity to elaborate. For me, that's when Vivenna started to make a little bit more sense, because at that time, you had everybody else's character was starting to evolve, including the relationship with Susebron and Ciri. That was starting to grow. Lightsong, awesome character. Really liked him. And sort of him rediscovering his past and just like, he had these capabilities he didn't realize he had. And he's starting to rediscover who he is. And then you had Vivenna, who's mostly just floating around. It's like, is she trying to save Ciri? Because she hasn't done anything yet.
Right.
Is she actually trying to, prevent this war? Because that she wasn't making any progress. That didn't make any sense to me.
It just felt like, and I get it. Vivenna went there to save her sister, but then she went on this whole... She found herself. She found herself because her entire upbringing was to be in Ciri's place, and so everything that she ever was taught and learned and knew was taken away from her. So she really did have to find herself. It just felt like, it just never clicked with me. In fact,
so you didn't like
the homeless part. you brought it up to me, and I kind of forgot that even happened.
Oh, really?
And so it was just like I would just get to Vivenna.
Did you feel it felt forced or something?
I didn't feel like it was forced. It just felt like there was a better way. I thought, I don't know what the better way would have been, but like you took the extreme of going from princess to homeless, and it was just like, I don't know. It just didn't click with me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fair. And I can understand then why this book is a little bit less palatable for you, because you had so much Vivenna for half of it. Mm-hmm. And you got an awful lot of a character maybe that wasn't quite clicking, and then you didn't like her transition.
Yeah. I almost wish that instead of being homeless, like she would have tried to save Ciri and then gotten like captured or something. And
she's
like
kind of useless.
She's kind of useless, man. And then, you know, she picks it up at the end, and Vasher's like, "Oh, you're the greatest." And I like the way that it ended, where her and Vasher are kind of like a package deal now, and she's like, "I'm just renouncing everything that I knew." But
Vivenna? Yeah, and Vasher. Yeah, that's cool. And they're kind of doing their own little spinoff thing now.
Right. So I like that. I thought there was probably a way that he could have given us that down and out story arc with Vivenna, but applied it more to the overarching story, because her being homeless doesn't really do anything for the story other than when she like shows up to that one guy and was like, "Hey, you stole my corner like 3 times."
What it allows her to do is recognize that religion is not just what you what you say and what you wear, and how it's how you because put in the same position, she did take breath. Mm-hmm. She was running around in like her undergarments, right? And so everything before she realizes was such a superficial version of religion, and that actually like she didn't understand it at all. Mm-hmm. The elements of religion that she understood and that mattered to her were all superficial. Yeah. And until she was truly able to like put herself in a situation, like could she put her money where her mouth is, that's when she truly found her backbone.
Well, they always talk about judging, and how Vivenna, like the virtues for her judging, like you can't do that. Yeah. But turns out she was the most judgmental of all of them. Mm-hmm. And so for her,
she does realize that too,
yeah, she realizes that, and I do think, the more that we talk about it, I think that he did that in the right way. It's just at the time it didn't click with me.
Well, it's kind of interesting because Ciri was the opposite, where she had grown up and she was outlandish. Like she did appreciate like colors, for example, and she didn't follow the rule of their religion. And I think, what was that religion called again? It's called austere, God of Colors. And so
Astra.
Anyways, she wasn't Ostrism, the Idrian religion. Yeah. And then iridescent tones was the Hallandren religion. But anyways, you have Ciri, who in many ways was more pure in who she was, and like actually maybe embracing some of the tenets of the religion. Mm-hmm. Where and her sister Vivenna was not, and so Vivenna kind of recognizes that actually Ciri did have this power, or did have that she was going about it the right way, by kind of shirking a lot of the riffraff around the religion, all the pious, like being overly pious, for example, or like what you wear, how you behave, how you speak.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that the iridescent tones seems to be more, if you're truly, gods aside, if you're walking around with all these weird colors on, like you're not judging people for like looking all put together. Like they seem to have more of the virtues than Vivenna had at all, trying to like be an orthodox practitioner.
Well, that's kind of an interesting situation too, where you basically had, and I'm going to kind of maybe fumble through this a little bit, but basically the way it worked, right, was it was all one. Mm-hmm. And then you had the Manywar. And the Manywar was fought for maybe several different reasons, but regardless, the Manywar happened, and Idris basically broke off from Hallandren, right? Is that kind of how, I believe that's how that kind of worked.
Yeah, they moved out.
And so at one point there was like a singular nucleus of their society, their religion, their culture, and then it did include colors, obviously. It did include biochroma and awakening and things of that nature. But then they moved out of that environment and then kind of created their own
I think
thing.
once the awakening came in, that's when they moved out.
Well,
they
either
liked
way,
the God aspect, but they didn't. I don't know if they liked the awakening.
I think
aspect.
they grew to not like maybe as they were trying to create their own identity religiously, that was something that they really stuck on. Like, well, and that kind of does make sense. Like awakening the dead is kind of
it's taboo.
That seems like something that's not okay.
Yeah, right. Right. If you believe in a one almighty being in Astra, you probably are not cool with manipulating,
and I guess I'm not exactly, you have the returned, and that is their gods. They are walking gods, right?
Yes.
And then,
but then
who's creating
those
the
that
returns?
Are awakened are those that can awaken are also returned, but at like a lesser level, I believe.
Well, the returned, they have, I think that they are returned at one of the higher levels of
the
heightening,
higher levels.
But I forget the way that they phrased it, but effectively,
you had to die doing something noble and then come back. Whereas,
well, they had the ability to awaken, baked into being a returned,
sure,
I believe.
Yeah.
And there was a term for that in the book, and I forget what that term was, but I thought that was kind of like an interesting element.
Yeah. I liked the returned aspect. I feel like I just didn't get enough of, you learn a little bit. Obviously, you learn a ton about Vasher and how he plays into this whole thing. You learn more about Denth and Shishara, and I don't even know if Tongfa was one of those like siblings, one of the 5 like original returned. But then,
are you talking about the 5 scholars?
Yeah, because Vasher was one, Denth was one, Shishara was one, and then there was like
Yesteel.
Yeah, Yesteel and Yesteel.
Yeah,
Yesteel was the one that Vasher killed, and Yesteel I think is still around or missing.
Yes,
missing.
He's
unaccounted for, I should say.
Correct, and I think that's the next. Like they kind of left that as like, and I think aren't they? That's Denth's brother.
Yes, and so I think that was. A lot of people told us that we should read Warbreaker before getting into the rest of.
Well, now that kind of makes sense to me. Because,
so I imagine Yesteel is going to come up in the rest of.
And I would think Vasher. I mean, the main Vasher protagonist,
sure,
who happened to be, and that was the big revelation for me. Like I thought that was a really nice Sanderlanche, actually, the way that they had built it up, because it turns out Vasher is Khaled, who
started the Manywar.
Effectively started the Manywar, but he was also Peacegiver. He was both.
Yeah, he was the good and the bad. He had a change of heart.
Lore basically, was created depending on the narrative you wanted to spin.
Right.
So whether you were Hallandran or Hydranian or whatever, you kind of clung to whoever it was that, made more sense for what you were trying to push.
Exactly.
But he was actually both. And I thought that was pretty sick. And that, he was able to... basically, and he talked about this, use skeletons and
stone and bones
to recreate that army, Khaled's army.
Khaled's phantoms.
Yeah, the phantom army, and that was pretty sweet. And then he was able to awaken them all at once, and he had kind of suppressed his god stature and body, until the very end when he awakens everyone.
Yeah.
And so he kind of chooses to be this downtrodden, sort of scraggly looking, homeless,
dude,
decrepit person.
Yeah,
by choice.
And they talk about that. There is a certainly a good, whether it's a page or paragraph or whatever, where they talk about the returned come back is how they perceive themselves. And Vivenna, he's talking about how, Lightsong comes back where he feels like he should be this, God David character. Blushweaver should be very voluptuous and whatever, because that's how she thinks she should look.
You kind of manifest the way you feel
right.
about
and
yourself.
Then Vivenna's like, well, why do you look like a homeless dude?
Yeah.
And he's like, and then just changes the subject, and I like that.
Oh, and I was looking at my notes here. I think Yesteel was the one that was killed. Yesteel. And Yesteel is the one that's still alive, and he invented the Ichor alcohol.
Yes.
And that, I think he was coming up with some sort of new solution even that was going to somehow be threatening. And I think Vasher's whole thing is he's trying to prevent more of this because Nightblood, I think he's trying to contain that. Like something is happening within that magic system that may be becoming too powerful. And I think the reason why he's going and offing the other scholars is because they have access to that knowledge.
Well, what if Yesteel is the one leading the...
But I think he's dead, though, unless one of them died.
One of them's unaccounted for, and that's who
Yesteel.
Vasher's going... Yeah, Yesteel. What if Yesteel is the one leading the Parshendi, and the Shard Blades is what his next thing is that he's been cooking up.
You know what? I wish I had come into this considering how some of those characters might be.
I'm just coming up with it right now.
Leveraged in the Stormlight.
Because what if he's the one cooking up with the Parshendi and he like invented, because the Parshendi, they're coming up that way to have the shields that are like half Shard Blades.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. They're coming up with and I don't know if it's the Parshendi that's coming up with that, or if that's just another faction of
somebody
Roshar
else in Roshar, they're coming up with that.
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
So I could see them, that's where he comes in, because he's awakening things. He's able to, maybe not, he's able to manipulate metals and whatnot that I think is very in tune with the Shard Blades.
Well, it could wouldn't it be crazy if what are those, I'm forgetting the name of those big rock type features.
Yes, give me a second, continue on.
What if, because that seems like it's been awakened, and I don't know that Vasher would be the one to do that, but using some sort of bones inside of that could awaken rock.
Yeah.
But that seems like it could be a little bit of a stretch, but that would be really interesting.
Somebody told us that we got to read Warbreaker before the next book, so I got to feel like something's tying in.
For sure, I think Vasher ties in. I think it'd be very interesting if Yesteel ties in. Shashar's dead, Yesteel's dead, you have Denth, but Denth didn't feel like a super critical component per se of the greater
I could see
Cosmere.
him just popping up in a chapter here and there as just like a bad guy, but not like a main protagonist.
Well, I'm pretty sure that Brandon Sanderson said in some interviews that Yesteel ends up being a major antagonist for a planned sequel. So you have Yesteel, and then and it's going to be tentatively titled Nightblood.
Oh, okay.
So that'd be pretty sick. So if he is getting his own sort of spinoff, then maybe he plays into the greater Cosmere.
Yeah.
You also do have, Nightblood itself, that'd be cool if he kind of poked his little head out, someone yielding him.
His little tip.
Yeah. If he poked his little sword tip out. But yeah, so that would be kind of interesting. And I liked that. I thought that was a pretty sufficient Sanderlanche. Were you underwhelmed by that whole situation?
Honestly, man, I think I was just so jaded on the book that I just wanted it to end.
Really?
That I just
so you didn't have that sort of
didn't. I was like, okay, I get it. It just felt like
tried
it
out.
Just felt like it had to happen.
Oh, okay.
It just felt like it just got dropped in there. And
did you see Vasher being Khaled though?
I didn't see him being Khaled, but I saw him being far more than he led on to be.
Yeah. Well, I was able to figure out ahead of time that he was one of the scholars.
Right.
But I didn't know that the scholars were returned gods.
I didn't either.
So that was interesting. I really liked that. And I did like Susebron's character too, actually, and how, that was kind of how things started to turn around. But for me, as well, it was him and Siri, but I liked that kind of spinoff where it made me a little bit more engaged when I wasn't liking the Vivenna storyline by seeing, him not being as bad as you thought, and then she was kind of naked in front of him. She was just kind of perched up doing downward dog for all night. And he's just kind of lurking.
Yeah,
I thought I was laughing at that. That seemed like an insane concept.
It's an insane concept. I did think that was funny, especially because Susebron's effectively like a fifth grader.
Yeah. And you didn't know that.
What are you doing?
Thinking that was terrifying. Scenario where she has to drop trowel and then just bend over for days sleeping on marble
with no tongue.
So it's such a strange scenario. That seemed pretty creative, actually.
Yeah.
I was just like, how did you make this work?
That's an insane concept.
Nuts. Yeah, such an insane concept. It turns out that was the Pan Call, right? That were kind of like, I think that they wanted to, well, was it the Pan Call? Well, obviously they wanted to control Susebron.
So they cut out Susebron's tongue because they had to.
Yeah.
And so that was the real priest. The real priest cut his tongue out because they couldn't let him
use the biochroma.
So that was kosher.
So that's always been happening.
That was always kosher. It was more about having the baby that the Pan Call didn't want to happen because Bluefingers, obviously it was Pan Call being like, no, don't have that kid. Don't have that kid. When everybody else was like, no, like you're good. You can have one.
Yeah.
Well, you should.
But what would have been the issue for him now that we're talking about it, was a little bit of a blind spot where I'm wondering, like, because obviously he wanted, basically all Bluefingers wanted and the rest of the Pan Call was to basically manipulate the returned into getting the access codes to all of the army.
Right.
That
they wanted Hallandren and Idris to fight so that way they would be weakened and Pan Call could raise up and then
he was
take over.
Start that by taking all of those undead, lifeless.
Right, the lifeless codes.
And get them to attack Idris. And so, and then that was a pretty crazy scene too where they're like, torturing Blushweaver and Susebron or Lightsong went down there and ended up getting this shit kicked in.
I would say that was the Lightsong Blushweaver was for sure my favorite part of the whole book because Blushweaver is effectively a porn star god and is just trying to tempt Lightsong in all of this, and he's just like, I'm worthless, I can't help you, blah blah blah.
I'm uninterested.
And then but there's an at the end where he's like, she's talking to Lightsong about how because you are so useless, everybody thinks that they can manipulate you, but by doing that you're making them take action, and so you're actually the most useful out of all of us. So I loved how there was resolution there. So that whole thing I did like, and I loved when he was playing Sherlock Holmes, like sniffing around on the ground, trying to find that trapdoor. Like that 100 pages was definitely my favorite part of the book. Yeah.
And then who was his priest, his high priest? Was it
he called him he didn't call him Spook, but he called him something very similar.
Yeah, he had kind of a nickname, didn't he? But Laramar, right?
Yeah, Laramar. And he called him like
Skip or something.
Yeah, something like that. Like Stump or something.
But it turns out that I forget if
they were brothers.
Were they brothers?
They were brothers.
They were fishing.
Or he was maybe like married to his sister.
I think he was
something.
Yes.
But no, it was his niece. It was his niece.
Okay,
so they were brothers.
Yeah,
they were brothers,
because he saved her on that ship.
On the ship.
Where did the Red Panther come in?
That was the name of the ship.
That was the name of the ship.
They were on.
And then there was the red ship, and then she had fallen off, right? And he saved her.
He went to go
ostensibly
save her.
he saved her.
He saved
but
her.
he died in the act.
Right.
And so that's where
and I think she did too, but he at least
went
down.
He at least had tried. Yeah. And so that was kind of an interesting dynamic too, is where you have Laramar, who is unable for whatever reason to actually tell the Returned their backstory, who has this, sort of fealty to him truly beyond just the religious construct because it was his actual brother. Yeah. So that's
I do love when they're in cages to each other and he's like, Lightsong, you were a scribe. You were truly worthless. Like, you were actually really stupid. Like, you were not good.
I did like when he came in there and you're expecting him to completely dominate and then he just absolutely shit rocked. And it just one punch. I mean, it was so quick too. And he couldn't even defend Blushweaver for a single second.
You were an admin. Like, you were truly worthless.
And then you're like, he had found out he could juggle and stuff like that. And he thought he's pretty sure he was some sort of investigator, and it's like he was none of those things.
None of them. I mean, I will say
so I like that he was able to be more than.
They did say that he was an investigator because as a scribe, he was
finding discrepancies in numbers.
Yeah, he was like a financial accountant.
Yeah, he was like an accountant, and he was finding discrepancies in numbers. Yeah. And so he had that sort of investigative mentality. But it manifested differently.
I'd say that was the Sanderlanche that got me.
You was
finding out that he was a financial accountant.
Yeah, that was funny. And also that there was shared history with Laramar.
Right.
I thought that was pretty cool.
And that's why he was so loyal. which I liked.
More so than any other high
Right.
priest. And the other high priests were kind of D-bags.
They all just had ulterior motives.
Right, exactly. So, the more that I'm talking about it, like for me, there was a lot that I liked about this. In fact, had there been, dare I say, I think a trilogy from this book could be on par or better than something like Mistborn. I think there's a lot there. The challenge is maybe because he didn't write it with that in mind.
Yeah.
That it, maybe we didn't get as much of the interweaving of the characters that you'd like, but I still think there's a lot here.
I think there is a lot here, and my hope is that it plays out in other books. So your biggest struggle Archive
is the magic system.
The magic system. I recognize that it's very creative. I just couldn't visualize, like, when Vasher, he's got the cut up like robes and it's acting as like prosthetics pretty much. Like, I just had a hard time visualizing it, and or I just didn't want to. I don't know. I was just jaded, and
there was
I think I would maybe reread. I think this would be a book that I would reread, and I would like it more the second time I read it. But it was just not what I was expecting, and I think I was just jaded the whole time.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'll give him that.
Yeah. I personally did like the heightening concept too, where like the more breath you have, the more unlocked capabilities you have, right? It's just like everyone's living in the same world, but there are levels to it where if you just had 100 more breath, you would be able to see with so much more vibrancy. Yeah. It's like unlocking this hidden worldview, basically, where the more breath you have, like the more animated your existence is.
Yeah.
That seems sick.
You read this book as a third heightening. I read this book going back and forth from drab to first heightening.
That's exactly.
how I read this book.
That's a great way to put it.
You had a lot of breath and colors, and everything was greater. I constantly was taking my breath out in something else, being a drab, and then I'm like, I got it back.
Yeah.
First,
for a second.
maybe second heightening,
and
then drab
That's
again.
fair. That's fair. But I think that kind of made it for me. And the problem is if you decide you don't like the magic system up front, then unfortunately
that's the whole book.
Yeah, that's the whole book. And there's a lot of that happening, obviously. And the Lightsong Blushweaver was what kept me engaged. But outside of that, I felt like I was just reading to be done. Yeah. Oh man, that
sucks.
That sucks, dude. I was gonna see if there was anything else. Yeah, because for me, I guess it was such a big Sanderlanche towards the end because I knew about the 5 scholars, but I hadn't quite put it together that Denth was one yet.
Mm-hmm. No, that I didn't see that. I mean,
when his color, because his hair suddenly changed to a deep black, then blonde, and then an angry red at the very end when he's fighting with Vasher, I believe. And so that was the first time that I realized, like, oh, so he has the same thing that like Ciri and them have. So he must have a lineage to the Returned as well.
What I will say is that actually much earlier in the book, maybe even towards the middle, you find out that Denth's last name is Trelades, or his real name is Trelades, and that was Susebron's main priest was Trelades. And so those two,
he was able to get in there
like
somehow.
Related.
Yeah. I thought that part of me thought that maybe Denth was either Pancall or Idrian because it seemed like his motive was deeper than just being a mercenary. Mm-hmm. Like I figured there would be something there, and I guess there kind of really wasn't. Although he kind of was just truly a mercenary because he was just helping the Pancall create this, sort of ruse to,
Yeah, he was
start a new war.
He was pretty much Vasher, but just for hire.
For hire. Yeah. So there was nothing more there, I guess, around like him having any hidden allegiance that was deeper. Because when his hair was changing color, that reminded me of, I thought he was going to be some long lost sibling of like Ciri and Vivenna, or somehow like on that lineage, because they can change their hair color.
Yeah, right.
So I was like, oh, like maybe you are trying to fight the Hallandren, and that would make more sense. And you're sort of disguised as a mercenary to be able to pull strings.
Well, actually, wouldn't Vivenna be a descendant of Vasher?
Yes. she's a descendant of the Returned, the original Returned.
And Vasher is the original Returned.
Well, I think he's one of them, right?
Well, he's the one. Yeah, he's one of 5. But
who's the first to be
Vivenna's
returned?
dad was, a descendant because she's the true lineage to the throne of the God King, and so she's technically like Vasher's like great.
Well, it says here the very first return was Vo.
Okay.
And I remember him being talked about, but I don't remember him being and I think Vo is who her lineage is to.
Oh, okay. All right.
So I think...
So Vasher would be like a uncle, kind of.
I think that they're all connected.
Yeah.
So is that kind of incestuous?
I think it's a little incestuous. But yeah, I think that
Vasher...
Vivenna and Vasher are related.
Related? Huh? Well, that would mean that Susebron, too, is related with Ciri.
Yes.
Those sickos. It says here, no, Vasher and Vivenna are not related by blood. Vivenna, eldest daughter of the Idris royal family, King Dedalin. Sister Ciri, da-da-da. 5 scholar. I think at some point, though, they all have to... It might be far enough removed at this point, but they're all...
Yeah, right.
They're all share a common lineage with the Returned.
Because if they can change their hair, then they are all dotted line to the one guy. And there's only a handful of people in this book that can change their hair. Denth, Vasher, Vivenna, Ciri, her dad, and that's it.
I'm just looking at that because that makes a lot of sense. So
it's just like this sick family.
Well, for sure, the royal family of Idris definitely have descended from Vo. I don't know if the rest of them have to have descended from Vo, though, but it would make sense because he is the first returned.
And if you were the king, like Vasher was, well, maybe not, because, like random kids, like they were saying that Susebron's successor, there's already been a baby born. And so that would just be like random.
Well, I will say this. For sure, Denth comes from the same royal line because he can change his hair.
Yeah.
Ostensibly, the rest can't, or we haven't seen that from them yet. So it does seem to me that Denth descended from Vo, just like Vivenna and Ciri.
Can you see the relation between Denth and Susebron's trilogies?
Between Denth
and trilogies.
High priest. If any. So it says here, are not family, but the relationship is political. Blah, 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 blah.
Oh, okay. So
Trelades is the high priest of the God King, essentially the top bureaucrat. Denth, they're allies, but not intersecting. Well, what is Denth's last name actually, Trelades?
I thought what is Denth's real name?
What is Denth's last name or full name? Because they all have a bunch of names.
Yeah, right.
Vasher is Khaled. So it says here, Veratrian.
Something like that.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, he had a bunch. I for some reason I thought that they talked about his like name having Trelades in it.
Okay, that would have been an interesting tie-in. Yeah, it doesn't look like that's the case.
Okay.
But, well, hey, I think ultimately I feel like we both were able to talk about some of the things that we thought made it good and what we thought maybe didn't.
My aftertaste is much better after this than it was the second I closed the book. I'll tell you that much.
What do you think was the difference then?
I think just the more that we talked about it, I just made some more connections, and also just articulating more the things that I liked about it.
Yeah.
I was just so focused on things I didn't like about it. So my aftertaste is better, and my rating will still remain the same. Okay,
well, that's a good segue then. Let's go ahead and dive in. I don't think there's any... I'm looking through my notes right now. I don't think there was anything else that was like a super aha for me, or like something that I learned that I thought was going to be this huge tie-in to the
true standalone.
Yeah, or like I was trying at the end to think, is there anything that I read here that I think is a good prediction for how this ties into Stormlight, and I really didn't have anything. I think you were the closest.
No,
one,
that would be the only
Yesteel.
Yeah, Yesteel being somehow tied to the Shard Blade and the Parshendi.
I'll tell you this:
would be crazy.
If he does a spinoff called Nightblood,
I would read that for sure.
Definitely reading that. But I'd even love I'd love even a rewind to the original 5 Scholars.
Yeah.
And the drama that transpired there between Roshar and Denth and Vasher, and how they created, the Ichor alcohol and these different, awakened steel for the first time to make Nightblood. That'd be sick if it was a blast of the past.
Yeah, like if there was a Nightblood spinoff, I imagine I would like it to read when you're reading Lord of the Rings, and they talk about the different time periods of the ring being found and the different stories. And because Nightblood, when Denth threw him in the water, some fisher found him. Like, I would love to see
just the Nightblood, the traveling pants.
Yeah, where he just, he's tied to one guy, and then he gets thrown into a volcano, and the next thing you know, 200 years later, it comes back. Like, that would be enjoyable for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what was your rating?
So I've thought a bit about this. I'm going to give it, and I know I didn't go through, and I'm thinking in the future I might, where I think about the different elements of a rating system, including plot, including setting, including magic system, personal connection, character development. I'm just going off a feel. You know what I mean?
Right. So I'm going off a feel.
I think in the future, if we really wanted to give a more calculated rating, we should really rate all of those elements that we feel comprise a book and how it should be rated. Right?
But that's not what we do here.
It's not what we do. I'm going to give it a 7-9.
Okay.
So pretty high for me. And in fact, it may be even rated higher than the Final Empire, which was a great book for me.
Yeah.
So
6-4.
6-4? Okay.
6-4.
I thought it was going to be more disparaging, honestly. So 6-4 is not bad.
6-4.
So you thought it was good?
No, yeah. Maybe the second I put the book down, 5-5. The more that I've thought about it over the last couple of days, and then this.
Wow. Because
6-4.
some of our texts, I thought you were going to beat this book bloody.
No, and I have to take out the fact that I maybe didn't give it what it deserved. I tried. 6-4.
Okay. Well, dang, I was kind of hoping you were going to come in here and try to bloody this book.
No, but that's
raw.
certainly probably my lowest rating of any book.
I think
that
so
we've
too.
had.
Yeah, and you've been on record saying that you tend to give a.
I tend to rate a little bit higher.
Higher, but yeah, I'm happy with it. I think I'm excited to get into more Sanderson, but Wes and I are on a slightly different reading journey now. So that's Warbreaker. That's what we thought about Warbreaker. I think I'm a little bit more high on it than our dear boy Wesley here. But we're now reading, drum roll, The Devils.
Oh, I'm loving it so far.
By J.A. Joe Abercrombie.
I'm loving it. Our first Joe Abercrombie ever.
This is our first ever. It kind of felt like a good one to get into just because, Wes and I have kind of been on this superhero-ish kick, sort of.
Yeah, we watched
Can we say that?
We watched Invincible.
And then I watched The Boys, and I really liked that. And then, we wanted to get into Abercrombie. There's mostly trilogies and stuff, right? So it was just reading a one-off seemed reasonable to get a grasp of his writing style. So I'm only 50, 60 pages. Wes is a bit ahead of me, but
120.
You can expect us to have a full review
for sure.
on The Devils, and that'll be coming out soon.
Yeah, I love it.
So, all right, W.
All right, Bubba.
Good stuff.
Well,
I
don't ever think about my rating. I think the way that you do. I think about it right when I finish the book, and then I don't come in here with an idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
sometimes I formulate it. Sometimes I formulate it on right in that moment.
Yeah, yeah. Which is actually a pretty good thing to do because it's you're actually listening to the dialogue of the podcast, considering elements that maybe you hadn't considered.
Yeah.
But like you said, I think you did a fair thing where you're like, look, in retrospect, there were more things I liked than I didn't like.
I totally agree. I just think that I was dated on it.
Yeah, and dude, I will say, there's so much that goes into liking a book, has to go into your headspace, and reading it, but then also with fantasy, you have to appreciate the magic system. Because if you don't,
and
then...
Like you were saying, I put so much time into being able to visualize the book that I just wasn't able to do that